Hello everyone. So today I want to talk about color complexes and specifically a cute rule I learned for an easy way to evaluate a position in such a way that you can determine which minor pieces you want to trade. Just to explicitly lay it out for you right off the bat, for this method, step one is to evaluate the piece activity of all your minor pieces and whether your pieces can access weak squares. So let's say your opponent has weakened their kingside dark squares. So an important question to ask yourself might be, which of your opponent's minor pieces can control dark squares? And if all of your opponent's minor pieces are still on the board, then the answer will be 2 knights and the dark squared bishop, so 3. And it's the same for you. If all your minor pieces on the board, both knights and the dark squared bishop can control the dark squares, and it varies based on which pieces are on the board. So a general rule is if the attacking side has more possible attackers of the dark squares or whatever weak squares they are, then the defending side has possible defenders, then the attack is more promising. And you should try to aim to make exchanges in such a way that you are left with more attackers if you're the attacking side, or defenders if you're possible defenders if you're on the defending side. Right, so let's get right into the examples, and I will elaborate on some of the principles that are involved here. So this first example is a game between Ilya Svestikov and Peter Arnadov. Right, so let's start from the beginning here, sorry. Right, so we're just going to go very quickly through these examples because I sort of have some key points that I want to mention for each of them. So we can see right away that black is already putting all of his pawns on the dark squares. And we are going to reach such a position like this where literally, I mean, this is sort of a rare case, but I mean, we see it in openings like a stone wall, and that's really all I can think of right now. But yeah, it seems like black has gone mad by putting all of his pawns on the dark square color complex, but it's a very concrete reason. Black has absolute domination on the dark squares and is preventing both the d4 breaks and the b4 breaks, and is saying that black is trying to attack on the king side. So what black does here is he tries to exchange off one of white's only defenders of the king side, the light squared bishop, which is otherwise a pretty good piece, staring down this this good h1a diagonal. So naturally it declines this trade, but now our f-pawn is going to start rolling, and with just natural moves, developing our pieces towards the center, moving our king out of the way, and we're breaking on a light square. And this is the first thing that I want to bring up about breakthroughs. So when you are going for a dark square strategy in the middle game, you put all your pawns on dark squares. Naturally, if you're going to make a pawn break, it's going to be on a light square. And this rule applies for piece infiltrations as well. So if you want to make progress by infiltrating your pieces into your opponent's camp, a lot of times this happens with a knight, and if your knight uses one of the natural, let's say, this d4 outpost, which is created by the structure that you've worked so hard to achieve with the dark squares, from that square, your knight is going to be aiming at a light square. It's sort of the same thing if you think about the activity of your light squared bishop. The activity of your light squared bishop is going to become exponentially stronger after you break through on the light squares, as we can see right here. So you can see that our knight and our bishop and even our rook are x-raying all towards this very weak e2 square. And there's not much anymore that white can do about this. After this exchange, white has this really nice tactic on e2 because after taking, white is getting mated on e2. So this is a very brutal example of black delivering mate on the opposite color of the initial strategy that he went for in the middle game, aka the dark squares. So we're going to see more examples of this in sort of different ways, and we're going to go a little bit quicker through the rest here. Okay, this position, or this game, is between Martinovic and Bohan Kurajika. It's another Nimzo. And again, we have this thematic e5 break in this dark square strategy. Queen e7, castles, knight h5. We get the knight to this very nice f4 outpost. And let's see what happens. Okay, so this is what I want to talk about here. This b5 break is extremely thematic in the Nimzo, whether or not it's right away from b7 to b5 or after this this queenside fianchetto, where we go b6, bishop g7, and eventually later b5. And this is very effective right now since white has committed to c4 and d5, and this makes b5 all the more powerful because our bishop and queen right now, and even our knight, are targeting this weak d5 square. So we're undermining white's structure here in a very powerful way. We're taking in the center, and we're left with these very strong central pawns. Okay, so let's just see how the game ended. Okay, we're breaking through again on a light square. This is very typical. And our knight comes back to the very nice outpost. We activate all our pieces. And we're breaking through again on a light square, and black is completely winning. We don't have to go through the end. Okay, this is a game between AlphaZero and Stockfish 2017. Many of you may have seen it before. It's pretty well known by now. It's came from a French, and white. AlphaZero characteristically has a lot of space already and is gearing up to break through on the light squares because, you know, this is a dark square strategy that it's employed. Dark squares in the center, position locked. Both of black's bishops are pretty bad. And yeah, we get this breakthrough. Bishop takes g6. Black can't take because this pawn is hanging, right? So bishop takes g5, takes, and another dark breakthrough on the light squares, which is just very illustrative of our point. Pawns on dark squares, eventual breakthrough on light squares. And I mean, black has to decline it in this case. It doesn't always happen, but sometimes black doesn't have a good way to accept the sacrifice on the light squares. So eventually we end up regaining control over the dark square complex, and this ends up in a victory for white. The f pawn is just too strong, and the activity of all of white's pieces are superior. Okay. Here is another example from AlphaZero against Stockfish. In this position, rook g5 was played, and you can see that this allows, after a couple moves, knight e6 was played with this fork. But this is all part of AlphaZero's plan, if we can attribute a plan to an AI. And after this, black has to retreat, and we can see that white has this very, very powerful unopposed dark squared bishop, which will remain unopposed for the rest of the game because we tempted black into trading off its only protector of the dark squares, the knight. So in this position, white is completely winning on the dark squares, and black is left completely without counterplay. All of black's pieces are shut in and with no purpose. The king activates itself, grabs a pawn, and after this queen trade, eventually, this is the end of the game. Very nice. And we'll go on to the next one. This is a game, Bent Larsen versus Portish. And this is a very nice example in this position of a strategic decision that was taken to part with the bishop pair voluntarily in order to play a3, forcing the bishop to trade itself. And now, if we take stock of the position, what color squares should white be playing on? You should be asking yourself. So both of white's minor pieces can control the dark squares, and only one of black's minor pieces can control the dark squares. So therefore, white is better, if not winning, on the dark squares. Now, we can say, one could argue that black is better, or black is better on the light squares because white doesn't have a light squared bishop and black does. But this could be sort of misleading because this bishop This bishop is extremely poor because of its own structure. It's not going to, anytime soon play an active role in the game, and it's really going to struggle. Sometimes black has sufficient counterplay if this bishop, this unopposed light squared bishop, is active enough. But in this case, this bishop is sufficiently inactive such that after several moves, it becomes obvious. Black infiltrates on the dark squares. This is a natural consequence of a triumph of white's strategy. And we get the pawns on h6 and g5, complete domination. And after a few more moves, I like this this pawn grab, queen takes c6 with check. Again, it's just another example of white grabbing material or making a breakthrough on the light squares in a dark squared strategy. Okay, we don't need to see any of the rest of this game. Bent Larsen won easily. And here is another very, very long game between AlphaZero and Stockfish. Bishop c8 was just played, and bishop h5 was AlphaZero's choice. And let's try to reason through this. In this position, white does have a bishop pair, but we can notice that black's light squared bishop is very hemmed in by its own structure and by our structure in the center. It's never going to play an active role if we can help it. So therefore, we should start thinking about color complexes and how to exchange pieces. And bishop takes h5 is very logical now that we've noticed the light squared bishop is inactive and struggling, because now we have an unopposed dark squared bishop. After we trade off the knight could have helped control those dark squares. But it allowed us to trade it off. And now after bishop c3, our plan is going to be completely to dominate the this long a1, h8 diagonal. And there's nothing, after a very, very long, torturous game by AlphaZero, it's very clear just by the nature of the moves that you're seeing at lightning speed, there's nothing Stockfish can do here. White just has too good of activity and complete domination over the dark squares such that black's pieces, notably this bishop, is just, completely tied down. If it moves, then black's going to be able to infiltrate with one of these pieces with decisive effect. So, yeah, white has all the time in the world to improve its position. And now the nature of the advantage has shifted after this queen trade. Stockfish couldn't take it anymore, allowed this queen trade, which is advantageous for AlphaZero, but in a different way. We now have the active rook. All of white's pieces are better than its opponents, and we also have this very powerful passed d pawn, which ended up being the decisive factor. Okay, so yeah, I think that's all I wanted to show you in terms of examples. So just to recap, we're talking about color complexes, going for a dark square or light square strategy in the middle game, when to trade pieces, in which scenarios to count the pieces for yourself and your opponent, which can control certain weak squares that your opponent has. And also the fact that I found very interesting that the decisive breakthrough, whether it's a pawn breakthrough or a piece breakthrough, any sort of resulting attack from, let's say, a dark square strategy is very likely to happen on the light squares and vice versa. So I hope you enjoyed the video, everyone. I almost forgot to give you this homework problem that I came up with. It's from a Tory attack, which is part of my repertoire. It's relevant to some of the themes and motifs we've been discussing. So if you'd like to have a crack at it, it's white to play and find the best idea. So leave in the comments section your ideas, and I'm looking forward to reading them, and I hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time.